Okay guys, you ready to finish? All we have left is to put the binding on the center part of your tree skirt, and the binding is going to finish the center and also make the ties for the center of the tree skirt. You will have in your backing kit 3 or 4 binding strips that are cut on the bias, which means they have extra stretch, so they'll go around your curve nicely. But you have enough to make 80 inches of binding. If you're making a smaller one and you don't want that much, you don't want your ties that long, you can just cut them shorter, okay? So let me show you how to prepare the binding and put it on your skirt. So here are my binding strips, and those of you who have made by Annie bags in our classes, this is the same method we use for that, but we don't have angled ends, we have straight ends. So we're going to have to, you don't sew these together end to end, you'll ruin your stretch. So what you're going to do is you're going to lay one binding strip right side up, and the other binding strip you're going to lay it right side down, and you're going to make it so that you've got a perfect 90-degree angle. So this is straight, I matched them up here. You're going to mark the spot where this strip touches this strip. So this intersection right here, you're going to mark that. And then you're going to take a ruler, you can take them apart now, and you're going to match this corner up with the mark that you made. If you can get it to lay down without wiggling. And draw a line. I'm using a friction pen. You can use any marking tool you like. These aren't going to show. So you've got your line, and now you're going to lay it back on the other binding strip, so your raw edges are together here and here. And if you want to, you can test this and make sure it's laid on here right. You're going to sew on this line, so lay your finger down and fold this back to make sure that when you open it back up, you're going to get one long piece, like a big long quilt snake, okay? I'm going to throw a pin in here because I got to move over to the machine. And I have a hard time keeping this perfectly flat. Okay? So we're going to go sew on this line. I've got my machine. I don't have my machine set up correctly. You're going to throw on your 1/4 inch foot. I just have to change you don't want to use the walking foot for this. You're going to use a stitch length of 1.8 like you would for regular piecing. And then we're going to sew on that line. Make sure all your raw edges are matched up really, really well. Right. So then we're going to check it, and it's straight here and straight here, and it makes one big long piece, so that's good. So now I'm going to cut a 1/4 inch away from my marked line here. I'm just going to lay my ruler on there, and you want to make sure that you're cutting off the corners, not cutting off your strips. And then I'm going to press that seam open. And I'm going to show you this one more time, and then I'll have my quilt snake, which is just one great big long piece of binding. All right, so I'm going to lay one strip down and the other one on top of it, so they come together at a right angle, and I'm going to mark where the two intersect. Okay? Then I'm going to draw a line with my ruler from that mark to this corner. So we've got basically a 45-degree angle. Okay? Lay those two on there, right at a right angle. Raw edges matched up here and here. And again, if I lay my finger on the seam line, when I open it up, I'm going to get one big long piece. Okay? The joke when we opened was I had to do this wrong about 6 times before I accidentally did it right. But we seem to have figured it out since then. Okay, so now I'm going to sew on that line. Test it. I've got one long piece, so now all I have to do is cut my corner off a 1/4 inch away from my seam line and press it open. All right, once I've done that, with straight cut binding, we would press it in half, but this is bias binding, so we're going to leave it, we're not going to press it right now, or really ever. So now I'm going to grab my tree skirt, and if you remember, we had everything set up for 1/2 inch seam allowances, and at the top, we can only have a 1/4 inch. So what I did already was I took my ruler, and I measured a 1/4 inch. I measured a 1/4 inch away from the seam here, and I made a line. You can also measure a 1/4 inch in from the edge, but it's a little more accurate if you can see that stitch line to measure from there. And I'm just going to cut this off on my lines. Because otherwise my binding won't be big enough. I'm at a really odd angle here. There we go. I gotta come at it from the other side. Okay, so we're just cutting a 1/4 inch away on the lines I already marked. I also marked the center of the tree skirt, which is this line right here, which is important in just a second. Okay, ladies, so at this point, you have sewn your binding together, and we've folded it in half. We don't press it in half at this point. Portion of this video got corrupted, so if you're looking at this and you see parts of this binding strips that don't look like yours, it's because we had to remake this part because it just, I don't know, virus flashing on the screen, it was terrible. Okay, so what I've done is I found the center of the binding strip by folding it in half, and I found the center of my tree skirt by folding it in half, and I marked both of those, and I put the center of the binding strip on the center of the tree skirt, and I'm working from the back because we're going to do all of the binding by machine, and when you do binding by machine, you start on the back. So I pinned half of it down already, and I'm going to show you what to do here. So I found the center and the center of my tree skirt, center of the binding, and I matched those up, and I pinned it down. And now what I'm going to do is gently lay this on my tree skirt, and I'm gonna pin it down just to the tree skirt part.
And you don't want to stretch the binding.
You don't want to stretch the binding. You do kind of mess with it because it is bias binding. It's very, it likes to lay flat, which is why this is a curve. That's why we're using bias binding. You also want to make sure that you're catching your backing fabric in your pinning, and you want to make sure that you're keeping all of your raw edges lined up, okay? This is also easier to do sitting down and not at a funny angle, but you know, we all have to make sacrifices. So I'm just doing about 1 pin per wedge, and I'm keeping all my raw edges together at the top. And then what we're going to do next is we're going to go to the machine. Oh, there's some threads in there. Look at all these threads. It's almost as if someone made a mistake and had to rip. I'm sure that didn't happen. We're going to go to the machine, and we're just going to sew the binding onto the tree skirt. We're not going to worry about the rest of the binding at this point. Okay? So, you guys are going to move to where you can see.
Sort of.
Yeah. And I've got my walking foot on. My 1/4 inch walking foot is on here, and that's going to make this a little bit easier to do. And we're going to back stitch a little bit at the beginning and at the end, and you want to, with this, you're going to make sure that your all your raw edges are lined up and lined up with the edge of your foot. Because it's a curve, if you don't be afraid to stop, don't be afraid to reposition, readjust. You can sew 2 or 3 stitches and turn if you need to.
If you're really messed up, stop. And
Yeah.
take out what's really messed up at that point. Don't wait till the end.
There's a lot to deal with at this point. This skirt is very, very bulky. And right here, I did a bad job snipping my backing, so you're gonna see it's a little, I'm following the edge of my binding strip because I know that my backing there was trimmed poorly. And I'm not worrying about what's happening on the side off of my foot. I'm only worrying about what's happening under my foot and what is right in front of it. I'm really only thinking about an inch at a time. And one thing I'm going to do here is when I'm done, I'm going to do it off camera, but I'm going to go back, and because I have a hard time, I had a hard time with the first one, I'm having a hard time again this time, making sure that I'm getting a full 1/4 inch. So I know there are points where my seam is less than 1/4 inch. So I'm gonna go back.
So the really important thing here is to keep the raw edges together.
Yes. And then I'm gonna go back and make sure, without all these pins, because the other thing I keep doing here is managing to stick myself, and that's really fun. I'm gonna go back and smooth it out and get a really good 1/4 inch seam. Because you can see here it's having a hard time. There's so much to think about and make it work that my 1/4 inch is getting sacrificed. See, I told you sacrifices must be made. Almost there. Pull these out. All right, so I'm at the end. I'm gonna back stitch. And now, like I said, I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna restitch this at 1/4 inch so that it, because especially here you can see it slips. So I'll just go back and stitch it, make sure I've got a good 1/4 inch all the way around, and I will meet you back here when I have done that.
Okay, but you won't have to take anything out unless you got way too deep.
Right. Yes, unless if I am past a 1/4 inch, if I somehow got to 3/8 or a 1/2 inch, then I have to go back, then I'll have to rip, but otherwise I'm just gonna leave this line of stitching in so it anchors it and nothing will move. Got the center sewn down really nice at a good 1/4 inch. I re-sewed that, so there's some spots there's 2 lines of stitching, some spots I did great the first time. But now what we're gonna do is, this is an extra step that makes things a little bit easier for finishing. Take your edges that are hanging off your tree skirt and you're gonna start at this end, like that's so helpful. Start it at one end and you're gonna press in about 1/4 inch. This is probably more like 3/8, but that's okay too. You're gonna press that in and then we're gonna fold these so we've got our raw edges together. And now I'm gonna sew at 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch from my raw edges all the way until I meet the tree skirt. And then I already did it on the other side, but what that's gonna do is give us a pressing line. Otherwise we have to be so precise in that it gets really hard. So we're just gonna give ourselves a visual guide. I have switched to the walking foot, on the 1/4 inch walking foot on the machine. And now I'm just gonna keep my raw edges together. And I'm gonna sew at 1/4 inch, and I am gonna back stitch a little bit here just because I don't want anything to pull out. So all I'm doing is making sure I've got my raw edges together a little bit at a time and making sure I'm not pulling or stretching because it is bias binding and it does like to pull and stretch. But I usually just work with from my needle to the front of my machine at a time. Make sure it's all matched up. Make sure it goes under the foot nicely. I'm sewing at 1/4 inch. I've got a 2.0 stitch length right now because this again is just a visual guide for pressing. And if we do our jobs nicely, it will just disappear into the binding strips and we won't see it. This is the other nice thing about bias binding. When you get to your seams, you've got half the seam is there and the other half is on the back. And they never match up so you don't get lumps. We're getting close.
That's why some people prefer to join all binding with a
40. It is pretty. Okay, I'm getting closer to the tree skirt, so it's kind of wanting to pull, and we, again, don't want that. Oh, look what I did. Sorry. Okay. Okay. Ideally, you would get to your tree skirt, but I managed to do this upside down, so I'm going to back stitch here. I've got about an inch that isn't sewn together, but that'll be okay. So now we have to press a lot. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to start, and again, the other end of this is already stitched. So what we're going to do is we want this to end up with this folded on our seam line. Okay. Whoop. Somebody was nice and safe and put the stiletto away with its guard on. And now the guard is stuck. Okay, so here's our stitching line. We want to fold this so that the stitching line
Just shows.
yeah. And we're going to press it. We're going to attempt not to burn fingers. So you can see, here's the stitching line. I don't know if you can see that. There you go. So here's the stitching line, all right, and it's just barely on this side of the fold, okay? That's so that when we're going to sew this one more time, we're going to fold it like this and sew it down, okay? So that the stitching line doesn't show, because otherwise then we'd have to pull it out. And that's no fun at all. So I'm just going to press this until I get to the tree skirt. And then I'm going to go to the other side and do the same thing. Just like at the machine, a little bit at a time, trying not to pull or stretch. Okay, so now we do the other side, and it's the same thing. I've got my end folded in, okay, so there's no raw edges showing.
Be sure you're pressing it to the correct side.
I am.
Show them how to tap.
Oh, so you go back to your where it meets the skirt, and make sure it's laying flat, and this part is going to get folded over, okay? So you want to make sure when you get to this end that you're going to end up with the same fold. That makes sense? I hope so. See, now my arm's in the way.
had good voices, we could sing a Christmas carol.
Yeah.
But if we did that, nobody'd ever watch another video.
There's a choir in Indianapolis, a high school choir, and they're renting carolers. You can rent carolers for your Christmas party as a fundraiser for the choir.
That's a cute idea.
It is a cute idea. All right, we're almost there. All right, so now,
Last step.
I hope so. Bet you guys thought finishing this tree skirt was going to be easy, huh? So now I'm just folding it in half and pressing it again so that we got these nice skinny ties. And this is just going to make our time at the machine slightly easier. So I'm going to press this around and then we will be back. Okay guys, so we are on the actual last step. Actually the last step. I can't believe it, but here we are. So what I did was I have flipped my binding over to the front and I've clipped it in place. I've made sure it's covered up anything that I want covered up. And now I clipped my ends too just because I want to, I care about how they look. So I clipped those too. So now what we're going to do is we're going to top stitch all the way around. I've got my machine, I've got my walking foot on there that I can top stitch through the hole, and I'm gonna, the stitch length is set at 3.0, and I'm just gonna follow along all the way around 1/8 of an inch from the edge. So you can start to watch if you want. I don't think we're gonna show the whole thing because it's not exciting. It's exciting when we're finished though. Okay. Stitch length of 3 because we were sewing through a lot and this is going to show and we want it to look pretty. We are going to give it just a tiny bit of help here because, nope, we're not. We're going to struggle a little bit because it's the last step. You want to make sure, let's see, let me put it back a little bit more. We want to make sure the walking,
needle first.
we're going to make sure that the walking foot grabs some fabric here is what we're going to try to do. There we go. So we're going to stitch forward a little bit. I am going to back stitch 1 or 2 just to make sure it anchors in place. And now, just like I've been doing this whole time, I'm going to worry about from the needle to the front of my machine, and I'm going to make sure that my fabric is going along the edge of my foot. I'm also going to periodically check the back and make sure I'm going through all my layers, and I am, because this is, here, we want to make sure that we're, oh, see, I missed, so I'm going to have to go back and fix that. But we want to make sure we're going all the way through, which this is very thin and not easy, so we got to make sure that we're on the edge of the foot because it wants to move. Also going to make sure our folds are pretty. With the tree skirt up on the table so that it's not pulling. A little bit at a time. And I know we're all anxious because it's the last step, but okay, it's going to get tricky as we get to the tree skirt. And this is going to be hard because the tree skirt has to go through the machine. But okay, so here we go onto the tree skirt. And again, this is where a nice big table set up to give the tree skirt a place to land is really helpful. And I'm going to go slow. Got the edge of the binding right under the edge of my foot. And you can see I'm just folding up over here to get the skirt through. Going a little bit at a time. The halfway point. That was my mark. Alrighty, getting to the edge of the tree skirt. And then we just have to make it down the strap. The tie. Alright, and now we're back to making sure that everything is folding nicely. Yeah. We should have all saved our little thread scraps from the whole thing, and we could have thrown those in the air. Of course, then we would have had to vacuum them up, so maybe not. In our vacuum last week, we had to cut the thread off of it because it was so tangled, so. All right, we're almost there, so now we just want to make sure our end is all folded in nice and tight. See, we want it nice and flat and even. It's beautiful. And then when we get there, we're just gonna back stitch.
Hit the cut button and yay.
There you go. We've got a tree skirt. Hard to believe. Whoever you give this to better deserve it. Otherwise, keep it for yourself because this is quite a project, but you did it. And so did I. Mine's going to my sister. I hope she likes it, and I hope you have enjoyed the project. See you guys soon.